All right, Cheryl, time is yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Rani. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are and where you're joining us from. My name is Cheryl Langdon-Orr, and I'm your tour guide for this afternoon on our third iteration of webinars to do with the WSIS+20, the World Summit on Information Society, a 20-year on review that has consumed a great deal of many of our lives over the last 12 months. We have some fabulous speakers for you this afternoon who will be setting the scene. And it is, of course, our intention in today's the Asia Pacific views on the WSIS Plus 20 Revision 1 documentation, all of which you were sent as a little homework assignment to have a little look at. There's no pop quiz, fear not, however. We will be getting our speakers to give us a little bit of a tour de table with some of the areas of work that they've each been involved with. And then we're intending to have at least a 30-minute open microphone session. So get together your thoughts now and have a think on what questions or comments you would like to make, and of course to interact with our fabulous panel. So who's on this panel? Well, we've got Isra Rosas, Director of Partnership and Internet Development from the Internet Society of Australia. We have William Lee, one of our favourites, of course, from the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications, and a whole lot of other things from the Australian Government. We have Jennifer Chung, co-convenor of one of the very important things we'll hear about today, which is the informal multi-stakeholder sounding board, the IMSB, for the WSIS Plus 20 review. Amrita Choudhury, who is also a member of that informal multi-stakeholder sounding board, but is also our chair of the Asia Pacific Regional Internet Governance Forum, and a leader in a number of civil society areas in the Asia Pacific region. So I'm going to now take us through, if you can go to the next slide, thanks, Rani. I'm going to take us now through, and I've introduced those people, so we're two slides on. Let's start first of all with Will. Now, William, it's been a lot of work and a lot of late nights for some of us, including you. I'm hoping that in about 5 minutes, which is about the time we'll give each of our speakers today, just to get things going, can you, from the perspective of a governmental point of view, talk to us about where we are in terms of this whole review process? What does this revision 1 mean? Are we heading to a revision 2? What's going on? Is there horse trading to be done? Fill us in on the gory details. Over to you. Thanks, Will.
Thanks very much, Cheryl, and it's an absolute pleasure to join everyone from across the Asia Pacific community this afternoon, my time here in Canberra, to talk about the WSIS Plus 20 process and how it has been developing so far. So as many of you who have been following this process would be aware, we had a zero draft, or a first cut of the text, which was released back in September, and a number of governments and other stakeholders provided feedback to the co-facilitators on that zero draft text. The zero draft was a relatively lengthy document and tried to cover a number of different topics and different issues. That zero draft has also been subject to intergovernmental consultation in New York only a few weeks ago now, where governments came together and presented their ideas on how text could be improved, the issues and topics that they wanted to talk about, and the issues that may have been missed or may have need strengthening in the WSIS document. That, plus the feedback from all stakeholders and a number of informal conversations that the co-facilitators have had, not only with governments, but also other parts of the community, have informed the Rev 1, which represents, I guess, an attempt to compile like-minded ideas, compile various thoughts from different parts of the global community into a document that governments can then work on over the next few days. So there'll be further conversations among governments in New York starting on Thursday New York time and running into next week on this Rev 1. And we expect that those conversations will really focus in on some of those priority areas and really start to focus more now on the text and what the text says and how we set WSIS up for future success over the next decade. To, I guess, briefly talk about where there's some areas of convergence and perhaps some areas where further conversations need to be had. I think there is a strong recognition from all across the global community, including those governments in the Asia-Pacific region, about the importance of the WSIS process, about the importance of closing digital divides, about the importance of accelerating progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals in 2030. I think we've also seen a really strong commitment to continue the WSIS process, including for a future review in 10 years' time, really setting up the WSIS as that really foundational framework for digital development and digital inclusion across the UN system. There are some work still to be done in terms of where that convergence might arise from. I think financing is proving to be an area where there is a lot of interest in how do we activate new partnerships between governments, the UN system, the private sector and other stakeholders to really accelerate the delivery of both infrastructure, but also some of those content and other digital development challenges that are emerging. I think as a second point, there's been a really strong focus on human rights in the document, which is fantastic to see. But getting the language right is something that will still take, I think, a fair bit of time over the next iteration or so. And then finally, on internet governance itself, there is a strong recognition about the importance of internet governance, the Internet Governance Forum, and the work that both the Global Digital Compact and the WSIS architecture and its action lines are doing. And there's still further conversations to be had, I think, around how all of that comes together into a consistent, coherent, useful framework, not only for governments, but also for other stakeholders, and also for citizens and businesses who are ultimately the end users of the internet. That's probably a quick whistle-stop tour of certainly how we're seeing things from a government perspective. The revision 1 will occur over the next couple of days, as I mentioned, in New York. And then following that, we're expecting a revision 2 in early December. And then the final sprint on that revision 2 until we get to the high-level meeting in mid-December. I'll pause there. Happy to answer any questions as we go through. Thanks very much, Cheryl.
Thanks, Will. I love your whistle-stop tours. You managed to make us feel quite calm and very orchestrated, as if it's all just floating along beautifully. I suspect, however, there's an awful lot of paddling just under the surface of the water that goes on. And perhaps, Jennifer, you might give us a little peek into some of that, because you've been, of course, as co-convener of the informal multi-stakeholder sounding board. You've been availing yourself to a whole lot of people and getting a whole lot of comments. Are you feeling like you're drowning or waving at the moment?
Thank you so much, Cheryl, and thank you again for APrIGF community for inviting me to share my thoughts on this. It's so lovely following Will because he's given such a great outline and framework of exactly where we're going, where we came from. And to give a little bit more of a context from the non-governmental stakeholders' point of view and a half step back, the IMSB, the informal multi-stakeholder sounding board itself is an innovation of the co-facilitators this time around. And I think it's been very welcome on many ends because it is their attempt to have a further conduit, further bridge to actually take in all the inputs from non-governmental stakeholders in this entire process. The IMSB ourselves, we've also tried to innovate as much as we can within our boundaries as well as a sounding board. We have met with as many people as we possibly can. We've been open to all kinds of meetings, bilaterals, conversations, and dialogues. We've even instituted some office hours, which is a low pressure, easy way for any stakeholder to come to us, ask us questions, tell us what they really think about Revision 1. And we expect a lot more of this going into, as Will put it, the sprint to mid-December, because there is the expectation that there will be a revision 2 coming out early December. And between that and the high-level event, it is just merely maybe less than 2 weeks. So I think everybody's very curious to see how all of this input is being taken in, especially since we also know that member states will be coming together later this week, as Will has mentioned, to go through quite extensive line-by-line negotiations on the text. So it is a curious thing that we also are trying to navigate ourselves as IMSB in service to the co-facilitators and in service to all of our community as well. I think there's one thing that we do know and we do feel in Revision 1. We do note that there is still an attempt to keep Revision 1 as balanced as possibly as they can. There's been a streamlining of the text from, I think, 148 paragraphs to 125. Of course, has been a strengthening of some language, and there's also softening of some language. And in a text like this, I mean, there's going to be expectations that this is going to be the case, but the most important parts, I think, is to focus on to keep and retain in the next revision. And I think from the consultations we heard last Friday on the 14th, the joint consultations with member states and all stakeholders, that the community themselves are clear on what they want to keep, what they want to strengthen, and what they want to retain in the next revision. Will has mentioned a few of them. Of course, the grounding of the human rights language in the entire text is very important. The grounding of the internet governance section is also of particular interest to this community. It's a very welcome thing that the permanency of the IGF, the mandate of the IGF remains permanent in this revision. Bodes well for the next one, I hope, with fingers crossed, of course. And of course, there's also the mention of the São Paulo multi-stakeholder guidelines from Net Mundial +10. That's a welcome addition. I think that's been called by many in the community as well as member states. I think Will has also nailed it on the head. There's certain areas and topics will be still in a lot of discussion and flux, namely the financial mechanisms, which is very important. Throughout the document, there are tightening and strengthening of the language on that. And of course, again, in particular, in the IGF section, the IG section, it's important to also recognize that the IGF itself has been voluntarily funded by many different stakeholders as well. So we're hoping to see that language reflected in the next revision. Finally, I guess, before I stop here, a little bit on the follow-up section of the document. There's been a lot of discussion about the linkages, alignment perhaps, of the GDC, WSIS, and also the SDGs. And we're hoping to see tightening of the language there as well. I think there has been some clarity, and there could be further clarity on how all of this can come way. I think finally, really the impetus behind it is to streamline it so there's no proliferation of new fora and there is no duplication of efforts and siloing. So I'll pause here and give it back to you.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. And we'll come back to some of those points when we start playing around in the world of the open mic. Amrita, now from you, we'd very much appreciate, even though you are also part of the IMSB, if you could particularly focus on how the Asia Pacific Regional Internet Governance Forum, which we held just a little while ago, how that activity and our community around the APAC space has been working on discussions and contributing to this WSIS+20 process. Over to you.
Thank you, Cheryl, and hello, everyone. So the Asia Pacific region, as you know, is very diverse. We wanted more conversations to happen here, the young people or all the other communities to be involved. And that is why we had a working group which was set up. And this is headed by Joyce Chen from APrIGF. Unfortunately, she is in another conference, so she would not be able to be here. So once the group was formed, we thought we wanted to build capacity on what the WSIS+20 review process is, find out what the issues are of importance for our region, as well as contribute our thoughts into the global process in some form or the other. At first, on the 3rd of June, we had a introductory discussion webinar to explain what the WSIS+20 process is, as well as the element paper which was on. It was more of building the understanding of what this entire process is, what it entails, etc. We had William again, Jennifer, Sorina. Following that, we wanted to see what would come out in the zero draft, and subsequently we had our second webinar on the zero draft. This was more of an advanced layer wherein we had the setting of tones about the different issues in the zero draft. And then we had a breakout, and some of the issues which were taken in the breakout groups, which we thought may be of interest to or importance based upon our conversations in the working group, was the internet governance part, the digital access part. We also took in building the confidence through ICT. We also took in human rights and the digital economy. Subsequent to that, we had a paper which was drafted, which we also submitted, and our Vice Chair Ashirvad also presented upon it. At the APrIGF, which unfortunately went virtual, we had the co-facilitators coming and speaking at one of the sessions. There were opportunity for people to raise their views, and subsequently at the town halls, which was led by our drafting committee chairs, there was also a feedback session which was taken. The idea was to get more feedback from the community, the young folks, etc., so that we can form some kind of not position, but some kind of pointers which we can share. So these were some of the processes which were there, and we would be happy to share our points into it. Of course, we reiterated our support to the multi-stakeholder process, the internet governance, strengthening the national regional IGFs. In the zero draft, we supported some of the languages, but we thought some languages need to be strengthened or added more clarity upon. So these were obviously some of the points which Jen mentioned of financing, supporting tech transfer to the developing countries, etc., were things which came up in our discussions. More emphasis on multilingual internet platforms was one of the things which we emphasized. More language on the human rights, but the action-oriented solutions to mitigate harms, issues on restriction of expression of freedom, privacy, digital harms were certain things which came up. In the confidence building part, there was more on the capacity building part, which was emphasized, and how to build more information and capacity within the community were certain things. For the digital economy, obviously, the financial services was something which was looked at, the interoperability between financial or digital transactions. There were several key points which came up, but, people can obviously read it, and I'll stop here because we want to hear more from people. Thank you, Cheryl.
Or we might come back to some of those comments, however. Don't put those notes away, Amrita, because I suspect we'll come back to a couple of them, including the financial that's thinking about whether or not the action lines can be individually funded or more generally discussed in terms of finances. That's two very different approaches, and we might want to pick those things apart a little bit later. Isra, the Internet Society has been a dedicated contributor to these processes. But you personally are going to take us through a little bit of a red line text opportunity. I think the differences between one set of language choices in one document and the same language choices softened or hardened, or where the flow is going, is really the art in all of this. And I'd very much appreciate if you can spend 5 minutes or so taking us through what's happened between the zero draft and this first revision. Over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for the invitation as well. I also want to share with you my colleague Adrian Wan's apologies because he's traveling to the World Telecommunications Development Conference, so he's not able to attend this call, but he sends his regards to the community. Well, after what my colleagues have expressed very with deep expertise, is difficult to insist on specific things. In general, I agree with what they appropriately mentioned, but something that I wanted to highlight is that in these particular cases with these high-level documents, the way in which the words are chosen is important, because we are in a moment in which it is important if they recognize or welcome or applaud, or if they use any different verb, it has a meaning. The important thing here is that we need to understand that in many cases we need to keep advocating for specific choices in words. For instance, there's the paragraph in the zero draft, it was the paragraph 141, and now in draft 1 is 119 about the United Nations Group on the Information Society. And they did different changes with the language, but for instance, they took apart, including as well as multi-stakeholder advice to its work as appropriate, referring to this group. It's a group coordinating different agencies of the United Nations. And for us, taking away these specific words, it's crucial, because that would mean that these United Nations agencies would work without consulting multi-stakeholder advice, which for us is kind of counterintuitive if they are recognizing the Net Mundial +10 outcome document, the guidelines to improve multi-stakeholder collaboration. And we believe that UNGIS could be one of these groups to effectively implement the spirit of the Net Mundial +10 guidelines. And in general terms, something that you're also going to notice is that many colleagues, organizations, people within the community, the internet governance community, pay special attention to the internet governance section, which is really important. And we are happy to see that it contains positive language in general, but something that it can also be seen throughout the document in the zero draft and in the first revision, is that it's still this recognition that to make the WSIS vision a reality, all the stakeholders need to tackle the digital divides, different kinds of disparities that happen, because at the end of the day, the WSIS vision, of course, builds on the multi-stakeholder internet governance, but there are many other challenges in which we need to bolster our efforts, multi-stakeholder efforts, to close the digital divides, to increase trust on the internet, to address new emerging topics, and also to realize that the emerging topics may have meaning at this point. For instance, many of us may point to artificial intelligence, data governance, even quantum computing, but we don't know what are going to be the emerging technologies in 10 years. So it is important to recognize the challenges ahead to make the WSIS vision a reality, to keep strengthening what has been working appropriately, such as multi-stakeholder internet governance, but not to forget that every word matters in this document, particularly on how to set this framework for success in the next years. So I'm going to stop here because we have the open mic session. But again, thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Isra. And I can't tell you how important it is that everyone listens to exactly what you raised, the subtlety of what words are used where and when in these documents going forward. There is a huge difference between commending something, recognizing something, and supporting something. And we need to watch very quickly whether or not between revision 1 and revision 2, let alone the end product, too much is lost in the bargaining. That's the most polite way I think I can describe it as. So watch this space. Yes, note, as Jennifer's just mentioned in chat, has particularly light connotations. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it'd be good now if we open up the floor. If you feel comfortable, please raise your hand, and when we call upon you, you can unmute your microphone and make any of your comments or questions. Not all questions possibly could be answered. Some might need to be taken on notice. Some may have no answers at all. But if you'd like to make something that is audible, just raise your hand and we'll recognise you. I see Ganella and then I see Judith. Ganella, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Cheryl. And thank you to all the panelists in regard to the comments on the revised number 1. Can't call it a zero draft anymore. So I'm just trying to get my head around it's the revised, yes, draft. So I just wanted to air a few concerns in that I presented to the ambassadors some of the concerns of persons with disability, and they were really quite specific. They weren't general, they were specific, and talking about specific paragraphs. And I know that there would have been so many other people and stakeholders doing the same, but I was disappointed to note with this revised 1 version, none of those were taken up, and it refers to paragraph 12, paragraph 30, paragraph 47. And also I suggested that under the human rights section, which we agree is a very important section, that there would be a subsection on persons with disability, as there is on gender and young people and children. And we know that persons with disability comprise 1.3 billion of a global population. So we are talking big numbers here. And so I also noted that there's a new paragraph, 110, on human rights, again talking about the action lines in the human rights instruments, and referring to gender equality, which I totally support, but there could have been something additional there about disability and the importance of accessibility and digital inclusion. Finally, I did suggest there be a glossary at the end document, because for one example, in the disability movement, we've been using the word accessibility in terms of persons with disability. Now the term accessibility is interchanged with access, and there's quite a bit of confusion there. So I would be interested, as one example, to have a glossary, and I'm sure there are other terms, and we heard before the importance of language. So they are my suggestions and comments on this particular draft. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Gunilla. And I did have in my notes, in case it wasn't raised, that the language provided by the disability sector with regards to not just we would like something to be different, but here is specific language that was proposed. I thought that was a particularly helpful thing. And should have made it easier, not more difficult, for some of that language to be more, shall we say, warmly welcomed into the documentation. So perhaps Will and Jennifer could take note of that, and I'll make sure that those notes, or you can make sure if you prefer, Gunilla, that those notes get into our chat. I think you the recent email that crossed over in one of the lists. There's so many going on. I think it was in response to Mona, some work that ISOC was talking about. That was extremely useful language, and I'm sure if we can get that to the informal multi-stakeholder sounding board, it could be particularly useful. Judith, over to you.
Yes, hi, it's Judith Hellerstein. So we were picking up on Dr. Sharia couldn't be here, so I told him I would be here to cover the DCAD issues. And like Cheryl, DCAD gave specific comments, and we just also, Dr. Sharia, we posted up on the website particular comments, and we gave specific language suggestions to them on some of our notions were picked up in Rev 1, but others were not, as is particularly we're looking at making sure that accessibility guidelines known from W3C, especially WCAG, and others are put in there. And we gave, in the example, we gave specific text. But also my question is, and this is also directed to Will and others, is that, and it was mentioned, some of these thoughts were also mentioned by Bill Drake in the Friday's talk, in that we give all these great comments and great suggestions and line by line edits, but it's up to the states, it's up to the governments to actually bring them through. And we were hoping that Will may be able to take some of these thoughts and the suggestions and red lines and other stuff and bring them actually to the force, because civil society and technical community and all the other communities can talk all we want and can make all these great suggestions. And yes, we love the sounding board and we love all this, but in the end, it's the governments. And so how do we get any assurance that all the work and all the efforts that we put in are actually going to be helped and supported by governments? And so that's my question devoted to Will.
Wow. Thanks. I'm glad I'm not you, Will. Judith, I'm gonna let him on likely to say there is absolutely no guarantees that any of the work and effort that we put in will make any difference at all. There will be member states which have large clout and particularly strong views on certain things, and we will be on a hiding to nothing if we think that we are going to actually have much influence at all on some of these things. However, it's not all on Will's shoulders. Jennifer is also part of the Australian delegation. Welcome to Australia, Jennifer. I'm delighted to have you adopted. I've been trying to do it for years. Between the two of you, dear delegates, how are you going to try and keep us lot in any way, shape or form happy?
Thanks, Cheryl. Look, I'm happy to start, and then I'm sure Jen will have some thoughts as well from the IMSB perspective. I think it's important, firstly, to note kind of how the negotiations have developed, and therefore how we've ended up at Rev 1. The conversations that were held between member states in New York a few weeks ago on the zero draft were really an opportunity for member states to present ideas and areas of prioritisation. We didn't go through the text line by line. We didn't, in kind of UN parlance, do a reading in the traditional sense of working through the text. What we did do is go section by section, and different countries or groups of countries talked through some of their ideas and thoughts about where the section should be going. So all of that has led to the Rev 1. Our understanding is Rev 1 will be far more a traditional process where we'll work through the text line by line. And I do think that all of the contributions that were made to the zero draft by the community have not been lost. I would say that on average, about 5% of a member state's comments have been incorporated by the co-facilitators so far. It's really picking up on kind of some of those core themes. And as we work through the text line by line, that will be the opportunity to make sure all of those contributions and ideas, particularly on questions such as disability and accessibility, are recognised and are discussed and hopefully adopted if there is a broad base of support. So what I would say to the community is keep doing what you're doing because it's extremely helpful. You will have seen the co-facilitators published Excel spreadsheets with everyone's comments integrated on the various different paragraphs. And if you haven't seen that, that's available on the WSIS+20 website. So all of that work has not been lost. It's just where we are in the process so far is that we're yet to move to that kind of red line by line review where there is that opportunity to insert those materials. So after Rev 1, if your ideas have not made it into the document, that's probably the stage to kind of really push it. But as we go through those conversations starting this week in New York, certainly Australia, and I know many other countries are taking the inputs that are being provided by the community very seriously, and we'll be trying to push those arguments as we go forward. So I might pause there. Thanks very much, Cheryl, and thanks, Granella and Judith, for the questions.
Jenny, are you going to be brave enough to dive into this one? Go ahead.
Maybe, sure. I'm happy to add a little bit more context. And thank you, Australia, for adopting me for the time being. And I do have to note again my thanks for that, because even as the informal multi-stakeholder sounding board, we're actually not invited into the room of the intergovernmental negotiations. By the grace of Australia, who decided to add me onto their delegation, that I'm able to observe silently. So I am not speaking at all during any of this, but I am a silent observer trying to give the information to the sounding board for our most effective work here. Taking a small step back, I think we have been seeing stakeholder input appear in zero draft, appear in revision 1. So it's not that none of what we're saying to the co-facilitators are actually making it through the document. Of course, not every single thing that we're asking for to the fullest extent is being reflected there, but I think that's also very similar to what many of the member state delegations feel as well. So I think at this point in time, I don't think we should feel so discouraged. I think we should be encouraged that this process is opening up in a way that we've not seen before in a UN process. We've never seen an IMSB before. We've never seen such an open attempt by the co-facilitators to engage and talk to and listen to all the stakeholders they possibly can. They came to the ICANN meeting in Dublin to meet with a different set of stakeholders. I don't think they needed to do that, but they absolutely really wanted to do that. They've been coming to the APrIGF ones when it is pretty difficult for them in their hours. Of course, for APAC people, we always do the difficult hours. So we certainly appreciate that part. And then finally, I think there's a little bit of a question in the chat from Zin about alignment amongst WSIS, GDC, and SDGs, and how the APAC community can make efforts to if it's, you know, a refinement of what they already have or kind of operationalizing that in that case. So certainly see where we can shine or help with all of this. I think in the follow-up section, I think it might have been paragraph 120, maybe it is. I'm trying to see in the new revision. Yes, I think it's 120 when it talks about a joint implementation roadmap to be presented at the CSTD. So for us to understand how all of this can work together in a more holistic way, we should point to that document, look at that document as well. I guess further on, if you're thinking about, I guess, WSIS implementation, again, this is taken up by different UN agencies, but of course, for citizens, for people on the ground in APAC, we also wonder what is it that we can do as well. I think we'll have a lot more clarity when we see the final document, and of course, the agencies themselves will be asked to or tasked to involve us a little more, hopefully. As Isra has mentioned, you know, the language there kind of took a quarter step back on multi-stakeholder consultations or input to that process, but hopefully it will reappear in the next revision. So hopefully that's helpful.
It certainly is, Jen, and the not saying anything, the silent observer doesn't mean that there's a lack of power in that, because what happens in the negotiation room is backed up by a huge amount of work that surrounds all of those negotiation points. And I get that can come back to you to some extent, because that's where the particular selection of terminology, and I think Ganella's point about a glossary, so we can have established and agreed understanding on what some of these words mean, if certain terms, even if it's not our personal preference of usage, if at least we have an understanding and an agreement on what usage is being applied with some of these words, that will be enormously helpful. But there's still, in this revision, what, 125 paragraphs, I think Jennifer mentioned. And if memory serves, when I scanned through it, that must be like, in addition to the preamble and the introduction, and there's, I think, about 16 entirely different topics, ranging from, you know, digital economy through to data governance and artificial intelligence. I mean, it is all over. Just about every topic any one of us could pardon me, could contemplate putting into the document. And of course, there's several subjects or areas of interest in those headings, which simply were not part of the earlier WSIS activities. You know, we didn't need to have certain things considered 20 years ago. These are things which we can't imagine not considering in today's context. So it is an evolution. That said, some of what we've heard, for example, what Gunella just brought up, with reference to wanting to call out particularly the community of disability and access issues, surely some of what we've heard by other input, I'm thinking here from Indigenous and First Peoples, where there was a call to also have that group specifically articulated in some of these paragraphs. For us to get some smarter writing in terms of genuinely inclusive in some of this language, or is inclusivity just such a dirty word in some sectors that we're not allowed to even allude to it? Who wants to pick that one up?
And I think that it's important to bear in mind what William mentioned about not getting discouraged after this first review, because it is also important to understand that we don't have a view of how the negotiations are happening. We don't know exactly which specific text have been discussed. So I think that it's important to keep insisting on specific aspects. And most importantly, also to recognize that while, for instance, some parts of the technical community may be focused purely on internet governance, there are some other parts of the ecosystem, the cross-stakeholder ecosystem, who are targeting some other additional parts. For instance, disabilities, for instance, recognition of indigenous community. There are some colleagues focused on the human rights language, in which including or not the word international ahead of human rights law makes a world of difference. So I think that it's also good to have this cross-stakeholder reference, and also going to this analysis with an open mind, in which each organization, each of us can recognize that we have some level of expertise on specific areas, but at the end of the day, if the outcome document is going to be strong, it's because it's going to incorporate the views from different stakeholders, from different actors, including the governments, which is part of the beauty of this multi-stakeholder process. So I honestly, that phrase kept resonating with me, like, don't get discouraged, from William. Don't get discouraged. The negotiations are still happening. There are still plenty of conversations to happen. And honestly, it's important for us so that the negotiators can take any suggestions to bring them to the discussions. And of course, we are going to keep insisting to try to keep for them to open the process as much as possible, but we also understand that it depends also on all of the member states to agree on the format and the modalities. But I mean, it's not that many weeks left, but I think it's going to be intense.
Thanks, Isra. It doesn't seem like there's much time left, but there's a huge amount to be done in what time is left. And to that end, how can we, as in more than just interested parties, but significantly interested parties, support the delegations? What is there that we can still do to make your lives well, I won't say easier because it won't be, more effective while you're in New York? Will, have you got any wish lists you'd like to share with us mere mortals?
Thanks, Cheryl. And look, probably, I think a couple of things. Firstly, continuing to do what you're doing in terms of reviewing the text and providing inputs and suggestions and ideas. They are extremely useful for negotiators in the room. As you mentioned, this document is over 100 paragraphs long. It's covering 16 or so different topic and subject areas. I am not an expert in 16 topics, and certainly I am not across the detail of every nuance of every word of the 125 paragraphs. So the more eyes that are looking at this and looking at this from a range of perspectives makes our life easier and makes sure that we don't miss something that's really important to the community. That would be the first point. I think the second point is to continue to engage with governments from across the region and to share with this community colleagues from the Philippines, Nepal, Pakistan, India, Palau, Indonesia. They're all in the room and they're all actively participating. So, and I'm sure there'll be many other governments engaging in the process over the coming 5 weeks that we have left. So continuing to work through the national processes that you may have to make sure that your voices are being heard and the reasons behind them are being understood is really, really important. And then I think the third piece is around not everything that is relevant to the WSIS happens inside the negotiating room. And what I mean by that is that many of the issues that are being discussed in the WSIS process are around closing digital divides, around addressing gaps in digital development and addressing gaps in those digital transformation journeys. And what is increasingly recognised is that that is not a journey that governments alone can do. It's a journey that we as a whole community need to take on board. So the more that is happening outside of the room to address those things, the more visibility of the excellent work that the community already does, the examples that are happening around the region, the more that's visible to people in New York, the easier it is to make the case that governments don't need to get involved through a UN resolution and instead can continue to work in partnership with the community. So continuing to highlight those opportunities, I think, is a really excellent way the community can continue to support the process.
Thanks, Will. There's light at the end of the tunnel, perhaps. It isn't the oncoming train, which some of us fear. I would like just to take a moment, if I may, to ask you all, in terms of not just my fabulous panel of speakers today, but everybody who's on today's call. Are there ways that you think we can do better in terms of turning very hopefully acceptable and well-supported sets of paragraphs at the end of this document into not just possible or implementable actions. The action lines are one ways of looking at it, but it's not the only way of looking at it. How can we do better than, for example, we've clearly done on the Sustainable Development Goals in turning the great ideas or agreements into actualities? How do we get the next, 1/3 of the world that's not connected to the internet connected? How are we going to see the economic and social benefits of the internet and ICT actually work for more people in a multilingual internet world? Somewhere there between something written up nicely and popped up on a wall or on a shelf and it actually happening probably hasn't happened in some situations for very good reasons in the past. But how can we make this one different? What are we going to be saying in 5 or 10 years' time when we look back on this WSIS process? Go for it, Isra.
Thank you. I think that the most important part is not to forget exactly that we are not advocating for language that is going to be aiming for December. In December, it's going to be approved, of course, but that's going to set the tone for the years ahead. So it's really, really important to keep it flexible, to keep it also ambitious, because we know what the WSIS vision can achieve. We know that we need to improve some specific areas, but not to forget that we are setting the tone for the years to come.
Perfect. Thank you, my friend. Jennifer, you're next, and this can be your sort of summations and closing remarks, if you don't mind.
Thanks, Cheryl. Everything what Isra said as well. It's very important. We're setting the WSIS agenda, I guess, for the next 10 years. It's very important to look ahead of what it is. I know right now the emerging technology du jour is AI, but it could be something completely different tomorrow, in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. So being able to articulate that, and it is part of the WSIS vision in the very first beginnings, it's really important for us to keep aligned there. Something very concrete you can do is to keep on sending us your text proposals. The IMSB will be holding another set of office hours actually around this time for you to see on Wednesday. I think Ronnie can drop that link in there. Please let us know what it is you'd like to tell us. We can convey that to the COFAX. We are writing a 2-pager reflections on revision 1, on the things that we're hearing from the community. So another way for you to be able to get your point across as well. And then finally, I mean, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do a briefing for the member states on Friday, really honing in on the importance of listening to their multi-stakeholder communities in their national context. So please continue to do that as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jen. Amrita.
Thank you, Cheryl. I think the most important point why we lagged in many of our plans earlier also is because we didn't take into consideration the local requirements. We made some text agreed by some governments, which may be good, but it has to be implementable at the end of the day. So how will it be implemented on the ground? How will it be monitored is something which you need to look at. And you need all stakeholders. That is why the emphasis on the multi-stakeholder model is always being reiterated. And as Isra and Jen mentioned, it has to be technology agnostic, whatever we talk about, flexible. Similarly, I don't know whether you'll agree or not, when we're talking about accessibility, perhaps we should say current or future accessibility standards rather than mentioning one, because it may be today something, tomorrow it may be something else. So I would say rather than being limited to what is available today, we should keep any of the text more flexible, which is future-proof. Thank you, Cheryl.
Wow, that's a perfect spot for us to wrap up on this whole concept of having something that is eventually not only implementable, but implemented over the next 10 years, that is agnostic enough, that it has the flexibility built into it. And of course, some of the particular needs we have now are not going to be in any way, shape or form, perhaps relevant in 5 or 10 years' time. So let's make sure we don't let our desire for the perfect text get in the way of something that is a good result. Now, part of that, of course, goes to the delegates. The delegates, we've got control of in your own government. Try and take influence, try and make your points clear. As Will outlined, Asia Pacific does have an awful lot of member states in the room and active. So utilize your networks as best you can. Ladies and gentlemen, it brings us to the top of the hour now, and it's been a busy year so far. It's going to be busier in the next 5 weeks, and I suspect that the APrIGF WSIS+20 working group might also want to do some sort of summation or rounding up a little later on in the year. So watch this space. There will be more, and make sure that your eyes, ears, and shall I say, encouraging and affirmative text suggestions are in the right pipeline for your delegates from your country to influence the negotiations. Good luck, everybody. It's going to be very interesting, but there's more work gone into it, in my view at least, this time round than it did way back when we did it first. Thanks for that. Thanks for everybody's time today, and bye for now.
Thanks very much, Cheryl. Thanks all.
Thank you all. Bye now.
And my dog wraps it up for the day. That's great.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.